Welcome back to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours virtually. Here we are for Diagnosing Problems Part 2, continue by popular demand.
We're coming to you from gardenatz.org, and I'm Stephen Nicola.
I'm Jim Konovich, and in the chat, you can find the links to these in the chat or on our audience materials page underneath the webinar section on our website. You can download the note-taking guides that we have for you today. We did start this topic back in webinar 13 and about diagnosing problems. This became part 2 with more examples of things, and we had so many examples for what goes on right now, and people were having such fun talking their way through problems that they're having right now that we said, well, we'll do an extra webinar. So that's where we are continuing today. We're not
Just
going to
remember the loop.
Yeah, we're not going to rehash we're not going to recap the recap that we gave last week. You can watch the beginning of this part 2 to hear about how we're going about diagnosing the loop of 4 steps and going back over things again. And we won't go back over growing degree days, which are important for you to realize that things go by how much heat accumulates, not by the calendar. So what happened on April 5th one year doesn't always happen on April 5th next year.
Might be April 17th or might be March 10th.
Right. So keeping track of growing degree days is why we gave you links to find out what your growing degree days are. We told you about a book, which thank you very much. Tilly found that there's a great, although this is out of print and much treasured by the people who own it, so it doesn't show up in used bookstores very often. She told us about directtext.com, where you can look up things like right now, today, in White Lake, Michigan, our growing degree days are 1,483 so far since the beginning of the year. We've accumulated that much heat over 50 degrees each day. And if I look at the chart that we gave you, and I look at for that area, we're right there. You can see 1,375 and 1,400 growing degree days when the Rose of Sharon is in full bloom. So the Rose of Sharon is telling us that these kinds of things are going on, that we're coming up on time for magnolia scale, for instance. See down there at 1900 growing degree days. It's about the time that magnolia scale emerges and begins to eat. Now is the time to start rinsing off the branches with a hard stream of water or using some kind of a insecticide, because that's when those magnolia scales, first nymphs, are vulnerable to being controlled that way. So you can use growing degree days. And if you don't have enough in the handout that we gave you, which has a lot of links about growing degree days and our chart for you for growing degree days, watch ABE books and direct text book for out-of-print references. Sonia and I have loved abebooks.com. Sonia tells me that it's been purchased by Amazon now, so it's not any different than Amazon, which is kind of sad. But ABE Books started as a compendium of used bookstores putting all their inventories together so that you could search a couple hundred used bookstores at a time. Direct Textbook does that for textbooks, which this one is. And according to Tilly, when she tried to order it, we sent her a message that said, when we get one, we'll contact you, which is a really nice service. We'll go right into questions. So where should we start? Got any questions that are unanswered, Teresa, that'll give us direction, or should we go directly to our
we do have some questions. So let's see if let me just back up here for a second. I'm not certain who this is. There's a telephone number 480 it starts, but they have a clematis that does not bloom. It's beautiful leaves and looks healthy. Wondering if they should wait until spring to fertilize and trim, or what?
Well, if it doesn't bloom, fertilizing and trimming probably aren't going to do anything to it. Okay, first I'll start with clematis that don't bloom for us in this area. The clematis that don't bloom for us well are the clematis that are blooming on old wood in the spring. Clematis montana, which blooms with either a lilac colored or a pink large flower early in the year, and can be just spectacular and very fragrant. Clematis montana, generally here, the buds that are up at the tips of the branches from the year before that are set up to bloom get killed back in the spring by late winter frost or the cold over the winter. So we don't see them bloom well. Clematis armandii, which also blooms with small white flowers in masses, in the springtime and smells wonderful, is also another one that doesn't always bloom well for us. So I'm not sure if that's what the clematis is that you're growing, and if that's what it is, and you're in the same kind of cold region that we are. I can't tell you any way to make it bloom, except in some years it makes it through, and then you look at it and say, maybe it was worth keeping you for this last 8 years to get this one
To
year.
get the one because they're so good.
Right. Other clematis are very free blooming plants normally, unless they're in a lot of shade. And they have a reputation, it's really unfortunate, but they have a reputation as being a shade plant. Most of them are not. There are a couple that'll bloom in a closet. I can't remember, there's one of the, it might be A12 violet. One of the hybrids is purported to grow in the shade, and there are a couple of clematis sites. Completely clematis, I think Susan retired, so I don't think completely clematis is still there again. But there were a couple other clematis nurseries, and one of them was called a clematis nursery, I think, that have descriptions like that in their catalog. And you might want to take what you are growing and bump it up against there to see whether or not you're not giving it the conditions that it needs. But you can cut it back, cut a clematis back anytime. You can fertilize anytime, and they appreciate it. Clematis are heavy feeders, greedy plants that grow big fast and can use a lot of nutrients. But it's not going to make it bloom if it's not blooming. Sorry about that.
Okay, and Diane Anderson says that she has about a 10-year-old maiden grass hedge that used to be full and tall, but in the last couple of years has been dwindling in height and girth. She's just wondering, are they old? Can she dig them out and separate and thin them, or should she buy new plants?
Yeah, you certainly can. Miscanthus is a plant that does it does crowd out its own center over time, especially if you cut them high. If in the springtime, when you cut them down, if you leave them this high, I'm holding my hands about a foot apart, and that's what a lot of people do because they see the professionals doing it that way. What happens is those stalks, which are not going to grow, the base, it's going to grow from the ground level. Those stalks shade the base and make it even worse and more crowded, and they die out more quickly. So you cut them down very hard each year when you cut them down, but
As slow as you can.
eventually, yep, that center gets worn out, gets too crowded. And you do have to dig them up and put back in just a quarter of a piece just from the outside edge. They can also dwindle because shade gets to them. We've shown pictures in the past of miscanthus hedges where as they go into the shade, you can see the plants getting smaller.
And in 10 years, trees grow a lot more than you think.
Yeah. And it might also have the problem that we were talking earlier to Karen Harrison about, that you might have an infestation of a borer in the trunk that's accelerating this death of the older stems of the plants. So do dig it up and take a look at it. If it's in the shade, think about getting a different hedge in there. If it's just old, it'll take right off, and don't put back in more than a quarter of a piece.
Oh, no. Don't try to save every piece. Get rid of the centers.
Yeah, get rid of it.
And if it's real big clumps, good luck.
Yeah, you don't want it to become crowded again right away. If you put back in too big a piece, you just get back into that dividing a little quicker, more quickly.